Christy, thank you so much for joining me today on Misunderstood. It's such an honor to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Rachel.
So I first came across you on Instagram, and I don't know what clip it was in particular, but it was something relating to a cop who had lost his canine in the line of
Yes.
duty. And I think and I'll have you tell the story later, but how it came to pass that you created K9s4Cops, and it brought me to tears watching it. And I didn't know anything about your story, didn't know anything about his story, but watching the attachment he had to this dog, who we see as civilians as these dogs that probably have no feeling, and the cops that you didn't realize had such a close bond. I mean, he couldn't get through his sentence
No, he
about
couldn't.
what that felt like to lose his partner. And I was like, I need to know more about this. So I went through the rabbit hole of looking down more of these pages, and I saw you and how impressed I was with what you do now, which I want to get to and talk about because it's so interesting. But the more I read about you, the more I found you personally fascinating and what got you to this point. So for listeners who don't know, I want to kind of do an introduction first to your background, where you come from, and kind of how your young adult life was shaped, if that's okay.
Well, gosh, I don't know if we have that much time on this podcast, but I grew up in a small town, Texas Gulf Coast, about 2 hours south of Houston, literally on a shipyard on the beach. And just my family was very philanthropic before we knew what it was today, more like about giving your time and always giving back, and that you'll never go poor giving yourself or your heart to somebody else.
Right.
And so I always had a passion for helping others, and sat on a lot of different boards. And I was married and just recently got divorced, and I sat on a lot of, I think something like a dozen different boards 15 years ago, and did all the corporate wife things you were supposed to do. And my little girl, she was at a formidable age, let's say 3 years old. And I knew everything I did, that was that, if you can remember that sweet age when our girls were toddlers, they mimicked everything you did.
Sure.
So I knew that going forward, my child's going to be watching, what's my parents' passions? What do they care about? What drives our household?
Right.
And my husband had asked me the night before Christmas. He said, "Hey, what do you want for Christmas? It's tomorrow." And I'm like, "You had 364 days to figure it out. I mean," he said, "Well, you want a pair of earrings or something?" And I said, "Not really." And so now I'm one of those that write me a letter.
Yeah.
If
Do something that from
do
the heart.
something that, if, yeah, I'm going to keep up with that possession. And if my house was burning down, I'd rush in to get those things, the macaroni art, all the things that somebody put their time and effort and thought about me while they were doing it. And as I'm watching the news, and I'm semi pouting, over Christmas, I see a gentleman that is completely broken up, and he's wearing a uniform, obviously law enforcement officer. And he said, I came in the middle of the story, but he said Blek gave his life to save mine. He did what he was trained to do, and I hope his death won't be in vain. And I'm, what in the world happened? Well, excuse me, there were some burglars that were going in to patio homes and stealing Christmas presents and electronics and things when people would leave to go to parties. So they got in this ring of, like, 6 guys in their 20s. They had a perimeter around this, like, country club and area, and he sent his dog in, and they killed the dog and choked it. And he had a vest on that stating what he was. Of course, they claimed they didn't know he was a police K9.
Mhm.
And the officer was trying to call the dog off, and there was a helicopter overhead, a news crew.
Mhm.
And so they were getting down so low that he couldn't call the dog. Nobody could hear him.
Right.
And so his boss comes out of this wooded area and he's just holding his leash.
Mm.
And he said he didn't make it. And this, I mean, I never met the dog, I never met the officer. I was in tears
Mhm.
just in 45 seconds that I was watching this. And I said, you know what? I just figured out what I want for Christmas. I said, I want to give him a dog to supplement his loss.
Mhm.
And I didn't know what department it was. Now, Houston is one of the largest cities in the United States. I didn't realize how many different entities we had.
Mhm.
Metro police, you have your city police, you have your sheriffs, you have constables, you have marshals, school police. I had no idea there was so many different avenues. And I mean, I was a little ignorant to the fact that I just assumed if they had a purchase order, I pay my taxes, they just go get another dog.
Sure.
But I wanted to do something special. I didn't want the recognition, but this man was obviously suffering.
Mm.
And he looked like he was about my age. And I thought, he's probably got children my child's age. How's he going to tell them when he gets home? Daddy does a scary job, but the dog, that you were playing with yesterday isn't going to get to come home anymore. And all these stories just kept running through my mind.
Mm.
And I called the governor's office and I said, I saw this on TV and I don't know like what department it was, but I want to get in touch with them to, supplement their loss.
Mm.
And the governor's chief of staff said, you can't give and decide where that money goes. In other words, it goes to a general fund.
Mm.
So if that were the case, somebody giving $100 may say that this can only go to Firestone tires that you use on the left side of the vehicle. I mean,
Mhm.
people will make all these crazy, asks. And he said they just can't keep up with the administration of it all. So
Mm.
if you donate, just be prepared. It's going to go to a general fund.
Mm.
I said, okay. Well, I thought, well, I'll just find out where they get the dogs and purchase it that way, and they can just pick out whatever they need.
Mhm.
And they said, again, it doesn't work that way. It has to go before the commissioner's court. They have to have permission. They're going to have to, even though it wasn't the officer's fault, they still have to close this one. And I thought, it's probably $1,000 for a dog,
Right.
maybe two. I mean, I had no idea. Well, they're not. They're a lot more, anywhere from $20,000 to $50,000.
Wow.
And just said, I can't let this rest on me.
Mm.
I can't be just flippant or pragmatic. It was haunting me
Mm.
that, that my taxes inevitably are going to go up, but now there's one less dog or handler working on the street. Is that how that works? And they
Right.
said, well, I said, no, I mean, that's exactly how it works. And so the governor's office said, wait, why don't you just either send the money to us and we'll find the department, which kind of didn't do that much for me,
Right.
or find a charity that does this and just donate one in his name. They said, this department has a lot of money. And I said, wait, what did you say? They said, well, they don't really need the money because it's a pretty fluid department. And I said, Warren Buffett needs money to be Warren Buffett. I've
Yeah.
never heard of any government agency saying, please don't send us a donation. We're so we're so wealthy, we don't need it.
Right.
I said, that's crazy. Well, I started doing some searching and realized how many small departments were having bake sales and car washes and things like this just to raise money. And they've been raising for 5 years only to cover a half a dog.
Wow.
And I'm like, that is insanity to me. How do you expect anybody to fight the war on crime or we live 3 hours from the border. So in other words, you're talking 15 years ago, but it
Right.
was an issue then. And I thought, how are you supposed to fight the cartel that has endless funds if you don't even give these officers the tools they need?
Mm,
This is insanity. I just
right.
can't believe that this is what's happening today. So I started digging around and I said, I have to start something. And again, I sat on a lot of boards. I had never started a charity. And if I'd known how political it was going to be, I probably still would have done it, but I would have at least been a little more aware.
Mm,
And, it's really funny because I didn't really have many relationships with police officers. There was no law enforcement in my family. Um, I- I just knew what everybody else knew. If you had an emergency, this is who you called. And I always admired them, and first responders for what they did, but I didn't have it immediate law enforcement. And that is a whole nother education in
mm,
itself. And so I've really had to learn as I've gone along. And I thought to myself, someone asked me when I first started, what's your end goal? And I said, well, maybe one day, in a few years, we'd be able to supplement outside of Houston, and I could even give one to Austin or Dallas
mm.
or somewhere. Well, it was 60 days after we started. We were in Dubuque, Iowa, and now we're in 40 states, Paris, France, and we've even given one to Africa.
Wow.